Ethan Wallace had always considered himself a man who could see through the surface of people, a man whose years of dealing with investors, competitors, and manipulators had honed his instincts to an edge so sharp that it had kept him not only at the top of the tech world but also in full control of every boardroom he ever stepped into. Yet when it came to matters of the heart, he had allowed himself to be blindsided, lulled into a false sense of security by beauty, charm, and the promise of companionship that he desperately wanted after years of loneliness following the tragic passing of his wife, Claire. And as he sat in his mansion that Saturday morning, sipping the first strong coffee of the day, he had no idea that the quiet world he had worked so hard to preserve for his daughter Lily was about to be shattered in a way that would force him to confront truths he had ignored, because the image that would soon burn itself into his mind. The sight of his fiancée Vanessa tearing apart Lily's drawing with deliberate cruelty would awaken something in him that money, success, and prestige could never shield, a primal instinct to protect his child at all costs and to honor the woman who had been more of a mother to Lily than anyone since Claire's passing, Marlene Carter, the nanny whose presence in their lives had been a godsend, a steady flame of love, patience, and wisdom. And though Ethan had always appreciated Marlene deeply, he had perhaps never realized until that day just how much of their family's soul rested on her shoulders. The morning had begun with such ordinary calmness. The sun spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Wallace estate, the lake outside glittering like scattered diamonds, the faint smell of bacon and toast wafting from the kitchen where Marlene, as she often did on weekends, prepared breakfast for Lily because she knew how much Lily loved mornings with her, their laughter rising in soft echoes through the halls. Laughter that Ethan paused to listen to with a quiet smile before retreating into his office to catch up on a few emails, but in the living room Vanessa sat cross-legged on the couch, perfectly styled in silk pajamas that likely cost more than Marlene's entire wardrobe, scrolling endlessly on her phone with that air of superiority that Ethan had initially mistaken for confidence but now increasingly saw for what it was, insecurity wrapped in arrogance, a hunger for control masquerading as refinement. Lily, in her innocence, had bounded into the room clutching a piece of paper with such excitement that her cheeks glowed pink, her curls bouncing as she ran up to Vanessa, crying out with joy, "Look! Look what I made! I worked on it all week," and she thrust the paper forward like it was the most precious treasure in the world, which to her it was, because it wasn't just any drawing, it was a picture of her world as she understood it, a shaky crayon rendering of herself, hand in hand with her daddy and with Marlene, the three of them smiling under a giant sun, with flowers and birds scattered around, and at the top, in uneven but proud letters, she had written, "My family," a simple, pure declaration of the love and safety she felt in that bond. But Vanessa, whose entire worldview revolved around appearances, control, and her own place at the center of every room, had looked at the drawing not with affection but with disdain, her lips curling into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes as she plucked the drawing from Lily's hands, scanning it quickly, and instead of praising the effort, instead of cherishing the innocence, she had narrowed her eyes and said in a voice coated in venom disguised as sweetness, "Sweetheart, I think you forgot something, or rather, someone. You forgot me, your new mommy-to-be," her manicured finger tapping the paper with authority, and before Lily could respond, before her little heart could even process the accusation, Vanessa, with a deliberate and slow motion, had torn the paper right down the middle, the sound of paper ripping loud and violent in the air, a sound that sliced through Lily like a knife as she gasped, her small face crumpling, tears welling instantly as she lunged to grab the pieces, crying out, "No! That's my picture! That's my family," while Vanessa rolled her eyes, tossed the scraps onto the coffee table like discarded trash, and muttered, "You'll learn, darling, help isn't family, no matter how much you like to pretend," her words dripping with the kind of casual cruelty that only someone deeply insecure could wield against a child. It was in that precise moment, as Lily sobbed and clutched the torn pieces, her little shoulders shaking, that Ethan walked into the room, coffee in hand, his stride pausing mid-step as his eyes absorbed the scene before him, the paper torn, the tears staining his daughter's cheeks, and Vanessa sitting there with her smug composure, utterly unbothered, as though she had just done the child a favor, and Ethan felt something inside him shift, a quiet but immense fury settling into his chest, though His face remained unreadable, the same mask he wore in negotiations where billions were at stake, but this time it wasn't profit or loss he was calculating, it was trust, love, and betrayal. He set his coffee down with deliberate calm, crouched beside Lily, and with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the tension in the room, he gathered the pieces of the drawing, handing them gently back to her, whispering, "We can fix this, sweetheart. We'll tape it back together, don't worry," pressing a kiss to her forehead, all while his eyes lifted to Vanessa with a cold, piercing gaze that made her shift slightly in her seat, though she quickly covered it with a laugh, saying dismissively, "Oh Ethan, it was just a silly little drawing, you can't let her get so attached to the nanny, it's not healthy, she has to understand her real family now," and those words, that arrogance, that blindness to the truth of what family actually meant, solidified in Ethan's mind what he had perhaps been trying to ignore for weeks, that Vanessa didn't love Lily, didn't respect Marlene, and perhaps didn't even love him, not for who he was but for what he represented, for the status, the wealth, the security she craved. As he rose to his full height, his jaw tightening though his voice stayed calm, Ethan knew in his heart that something irrevocable had just happened, that the woman he had planned to marry had revealed herself in a way that could never be unseen, and though Vanessa sat there smug, thinking she had merely corrected a child's mistake, she had in fact made the greatest mistake of all. She had underestimated Ethan Wallace, a man who could forgive almost anything but never cruelty toward his daughter, never disrespect toward the woman who had been her anchor, and as he placed his hand protectively on Lily's shoulder, guiding her toward Marlene who had appeared at the doorway wide-eyed and concerned at the sound of crying, Ethan silently vowed that what Vanessa had torn apart was not just a drawing but her place in their lives, and what he would do next would not just shock her, but remind everyone that love, loyalty, and family were things no amount of vanity or manipulation could ever destroy.